Calacatta Marble Tile, herringbone pattern with a border. All the tips and tricks that I use to install this beautiful floor. It's a 4x12 marble tile. It's honed. It doesn't have a high polish to it. It's just honed. As you can see there, it's not really shiny. And I'm going to be putting it down on a herringbone pattern with a border. So there's going to be a border all the way around. Down here, around there, and over by the threshold. So I just laid out some tile to see what my, because it's a really difficult pattern to figure out exactly where everything's going to be. So just dry laying some tile, and because this is small, you can, it's probably the best way to figure it out. So I have my line here, which is parallel to this wall. The room's pretty square. I checked up a square. I used my laser square. So now I'm going to dry cut some, because I have to work my way from over here out the door. I'm going to dry fit some of these tiles here, make sure I'm exactly where I need to be, and then I'm going to continue all the way out the door. So I'm using a 1/16 of an inch grout line, because these are really, they run really well in size, and I'm gonna stay straight, square, and keep everything exactly where it needs to be. So this is what I'm gonna be doing today. Is my this herringbone pattern floor. My underlayment, my uncoupling membrane is Mapeguard UM. So this is by my Mapei. It comes in rolls right here. This is it here. So that's what I'm going to be using. I put that down. I think it was Friday. Today's Monday. I put it down Friday, and it's all ready to go. And I'm going to start installing this tile right now. Okay, so I pre-cut a bunch of tile. I actually forgot to turn the camera on when I picked them up. So I pre-cut all this section here. That's all cut in, and then I picked them up and stacked them up so that I know exactly where they go. So I'm going to cement this side down here, this here. Then I'm going to pick this up, cement this side down, and then I'm going to continue working all the way out and around. So that's what I'm going to do. This is Mapei Mapeguard UM, and it's installed with a polymer modified thin set. And I'm also using a polymer modified thin set to install the tile. Okay, so because this is a marble tile, a natural stone, the floor has to be a lot stiffer than if it were a porcelain or ceramic tile. So what that means is your joist structure has to be strong enough to support the tile, and usually what that also means is you need a double layer of plywood. So if you were installing a porcelain tile, what you would do is you would check your subfloor structure, your joist structure, make sure that you reach L over 360. For marble, that is L over 720, so it has to be twice as stiff. So generally, to achieve that, you need to install a second layer of plywood. So as I said, if you were installing a ceramic or porcelain tile, you could usually put your underlayment, whether it be a Durock or an uncoupling membrane or whatever you're using, directly on the subfloor, provided that the subfloor obviously is in good condition. So because this is natural stone, what you generally have to do is install a second layer of plywood. So you're going to have your subfloor, which is usually 3/4, and then you're going to install another 1/2 inch layer of plywood on top of that, and then you're going to install your underlayment, which would be in my case, the uncoupling membrane, the Mapeguard UM, or your cement board, or whatever it is you're using. So this is very, very, very important if you don't want to have cracked tiles, loose grout, and problems with your with the tile floor. So just make sure that if you're installing a natural stone tile, marble, or whatever, that your floor is strong enough to support it. If it's not, then just go with a porcelain tile that looks like marble. So as you can see here, I'm back buttering. Now these are marble tiles, natural stone tiles. It's always advisable to back butter or flat trowel the back of a natural stone tile. Some stones need it more than others. For example, there are some travertines and some really iffy stone tiles that have a lot of voids and in the back, and what that does, it fills it. And then in addition to that, it keys the thin set into the stone, so when you lay it into the thin set, you get good contact, a good transfer. If this were a porcelain tile or a ceramic tile, and because it's only 12 by 4, then as long as you use the proper notch trowel, you wouldn't really need to back butter the tiles. You could just lay them in and then check every once in a while, make sure you got good transfer, good coverage, and you'd be fine. Back buttering on larger format tiles like a 12 by 24 or big tiles is always a great idea. It usually won't hurt. So if you back butter smaller tiles and install them, it's fine. It's actually a good thing. But in many cases, not necessary as long as you can get the coverage. So the way to get good coverage is to make sure you use a proper size trowel and that you do directional troweling. Now sometimes with patterns it's not easy to get everything exactly going, all the notches going exactly in the right direction or all going the same way, but you do it as best as possible. Even in this circumstance here, you can see that over where there are those little triangle areas, they're going in a different direction, but the most part of it is going all in one direction. And try and avoid swirls altogether. So this tile actually has a honed finish, and what that means is that it's not shiny, it's kind of a dull finish. And for a floor, that's probably a good idea because marble tile, polished marble tile, is very delicate and it's high maintenance and it's easy to scratch. If you've got a honed finish, it's going to hide the wear and tear a little better. So if you're going to put it on a wall, polished is fine. But if you're going to put it on a floor and you can use a honed finish that gives you a more long-lasting look, the original look, than a polished tile. So in most circumstances, a tile like this, a 12 by 12 marble tile, or a 4 by 12 marble tile, they are usually rectified. So what that means is that they all run pretty much the same in size. They're all pretty much exactly the same size. So what that means is that you can get a very narrow grout line. So here I'm actually using a 1/16 of an inch grout line. And no matter what tile you're using, no matter how good the tile is, that is the minimum size grout line. You never go any smaller than that. Even if you think you can do a 32nd of an inch, the minimum grout line is a 1/16 of an inch. So there's actually a very good reason for that, especially on plywood floors. Earlier I mentioned deflection. Deflection is how much the floor will bend. So if the tiles are butted tight together, and walking on it, or just normal movement of the house, what can happen is the floor will bend, and if the tiles are touching each other, that deflection will cause the edges of the tile to touch each other, and you can get spalling and cracking and chipping. So that's why you never use a grout line less than a 1/16 of an inch. So as you saw at the beginning of this video, I dry laid a bunch of tile, and the reason I did that was to make sure that I don't get any small slivers. And it's even more critical when you have a border, because you don't want to put little tiny pieces up against the border, and they just don't look good. So you want to make sure that you get good, decent pieces all the way around. And because this is a herringbone pattern with a border, I squared off my room. I actually have a video that shows how to square off the room. I just use my laser. I have a laser square. I just use my laser square on this one here to make sure that I stayed square. And what you want to make sure you do is you know all your cuts are going to be before you start. That way, you just don't start in one corner and just go. You do a layout. You know what all your pieces are gonna be before you start installing your tile. So that's why I dry laid a bunch of tile to see what my cuts would be. There's other ways of doing it, but for small areas, usually that's the easiest way to do it. So I dry laid a bunch, and I found exactly what my layout will be, what all my pieces will be. And then this section that you see near the tub, I picked up all the other ones that were laying down, and I dry laid and fitted all these tiles, these sections. So what happens then is now I have a good base to start, and I can just build off that, because I know that this area here is perfect. So I'm not going to have any trouble keeping my layout the way it was supposed to be, the way I figured it out. So if you didn't have a border like in this one here, and you just were cutting your tile up against the wall, you leave your opening, your room for expansion and contraction. So you don't really have to be that neat, because then you put your baseboard on top and covers everything, and you get a nice, neat line. But because we have this border that's going all the way around, where the herringbone pattern meets the border, you have to keep that grout line between the two patterns consistent and straight all the time. So you got to take your time and make sure that you keep it very even. Otherwise, it looks terrible. So you want to keep it even. You want to keep it straight. You want to keep the grout line always exactly the same. If you start opening up on this pattern, if you go off on the pattern that your tiles, the grout line start to open up, and you're going to lose it, and it's going to be very difficult to come back and get it right. So you have to be sure that you keep your pattern straight, square, and keep the grout lines always exactly the same. So a couple of weeks ago, I uploaded the time-lapse version of this video, And you know, I speed up a lot of these sections here because otherwise it's going to get really boring. So a lot of people said, well, how come I didn't use a leveling system on this floor? Well, the reason is because they're small tiles. Usually for tiles that are, you know, 12 by 12 or small, or even a 13 by 13 or 14 by 14, usually it's not really necessary to use a leveling system, and especially on these 4 by 12s, it would be just a big, huge hassle and a waste of time. The key is to keep everything, you know, make sure your floor is flat, and then you're not going to have any trouble, and use the right size, trowel, and just pay attention to what you're doing, and you'll be fine, especially with very narrow grout lines. The narrower the grout lines, the more the discrepancy in height between tiles, which is called lippage, the more it becomes apparent. So, you know, you just got to take your time and, you know, make sure you keep everything nice and even and flat. So, you know, a leveling system for this size tile is really just a waste of time and effort and money. So once I got that section down, I cleaned up my thin set off the floor, and then I actually dry laid and cut in another section of the floor. I just feel it makes it easier this way to keep everything clean and to keep everything exactly where it has to be. If you've got a big floor where you've got an open space, you can spread it, and then you can lay down a bunch of field tile. But because this area is small, you know, after you've laid like a few tiles, you're going to be coming up against the border again, and then you're going to have to make your cuts. And then if you've got thin set down, it's a lot harder to keep it clean and you know, and make good marks, you know, for your measurements of your tile. Doing it this way, it's you actually it's easier to keep everything straight and square and clean, and to get exact cuts that you need. So if, for example, you cut a piece of tile and you lay it in and it doesn't look exactly right, if you've got your thin set down, what you have to do is clean it off and recut it, and it just makes a mess. This way, it's just a little bit easier to keep it clean and keep it moving along. But again, like I said, if you've got a big open area where you can put down a bunch of floor tile, a bunch of field tile, and just keep going, then that's great. But when you get to these intricate parts where you've got to make sure all your angles are right and your cuts are neat and your grout line is exactly the same, I find it a little bit easier to do it this way. So you're probably wondering how I cut these tiles. Well, because it's a natural stone, pretty much all the cuts have to be done on a wet saw. A snap cutter generally will not work on marble tiles, and if they do, you don't get a clean cut. So you want to make sure you have a nice good blade and a good wet saw to get the nice clean cuts. So another important thing is when you're putting a cut tile up against a tile that's going to be in the field, you always want to use your rubbing stone to ease that edge so you don't get like a rough edge on the end. If you're putting it up against the wall where it's going to be buried, then it really doesn't matter. But if you're going to be putting it where it's going to be seen, you really want to stone that edge to make sure that you get a nice clean cut. Okay, so I got another section cut in up over by the vent and along the back wall, and so I'm going to pick it up and cement it in and then just keep moving along. So another tip is when you're picking these tiles up, the field tile doesn't matter how you stack them really, but your cuts, you want to make sure you stack them in such a manner that when you pick them up, you're going to know exactly where they go. If you don't think you're going to remember how you stacked them, then number the tiles. Put a number on the back of the tile so that like 1, 2, 3, where the tiles, what order the tiles go back down. So this is a relatively small tile, a 4-inch by 12-inch tile, and the trowel I'm using here is 1/4 by 3/8 inch deep by 1/4 square notch trowel. So select your trowel, spread some thin set, lay in a tile, pick it up, see what your coverage is. If the coverage is good, continue. If the coverage is not good, then move up to a bigger trowel. Very important to get the correct coverage. So in this little area here, I didn't need to do any dry laying because, I had a little bit of an open area. So, just have your tile in hand and then make sure you lay them in the back part of the stone, and then lay them in flat and make sure you keep your grout lines even and just keep on going until you get to that area where you had the tiles pre-cut. And you're going to be really thankful that they're all cut because, you can reach a little further and you can you can just place them in without having to worry about marking them because they're already cut and ready to go. So as you can see, I'm using white thin set. That is not because I had it. It's generally when you're installing a natural stone tile, you always use a white thin set. If you put this tile up to light, you can actually see light through it. I mean, it's not completely opaque. So if you use a gray thin set, it's going to actually change the aspect of the tile, the look of the tile. It's going to make it darker. So it's important to use white thin set when you're installing a natural stone tile. And this is because I'm on the Mapeguard UM, this is actually a polymer modified thin set. So keeping the tile clean as you work is very important, especially when you're dealing with natural stone. Now, if you'll notice, I have my sponge always right there. But I'm going to give you another tip on how to avoid thin set squeezing up between your tiles, especially when you're using square edge tiles and very narrow grout lines. So when you place your tile, you want to put the tile right up against the tile that's already on the floor and then move it away. In other words, put it tight, then pull it away. That way you're not plowing thin set into your grout line. So if you put your tile down and then push it in towards the tile that's already laid down, you're plowing thin set into that grout line. Whereas if you put it tight next to it and then pull it away, you're keeping that grout line clean. So the deeper the trowel, the more important that is because there's more thin set on the floor. So, it's a little more difficult when you're using lippage system because you've got your grout line already there. but there's other methods you can use to help with that. But if you're not using any lippage systems, what you do, as I said, is you know, the tile is already down. You push the tile, you place the tile so it's up against both sides of the existing tile, and then move it out. And that way you keep the grout, the thin set squeezing up through the grout lines at a minimum. So if this is the first time that you've seen my videos, my name is Sal de Blasi. I'm a tile contractor in the Boston area, North Shore. I have over 34 years experience, so I do know what I'm doing. My channel has over 700 videos, pretty much all to do with tile. So if you have a question about how to install a tile project or whatever, you'll probably find the answer to that question on my channel. So please leave your comments in the comment section below, and I do try and answer as many as I can. Sometimes I can't get to a few of them, but I do try and answer all of them. So also check me out on Patreon. I have it takes a lot of time and effort to make these videos, and if you can support me there, that'd be great. One last thing, my online store, divsmart.com. Check that out too if you want. And most important of all, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Okay, so got past the door, and I dry laid some more tile. Now I'm picking it up, and gonna continue like I did before. Cement it down and just keep going. Okay, so at the end here, just going to set in my last few tiles and then let it set and seal and grout. So this is the completed floor before grout. So I'm going to seal this first and then grout it. So I'm getting ready to grout the floor. I got my grout mixed up, but I forgot to turn my camera on when I sealed the floor. So I'm going to link to a video in the cards in the description that shows exactly how to seal the tile. Okay, so there's a few things you need to know when grouting a natural stone tile. For most grouts, cementitious grouts, when you grout a marble tile floor, you want to get a grout color that is not very different or is similar to the color of the tile. For example, if you've got white marble, you don't want to use black grout. There are some specific grouts you can use to do that, but in general, with a cementitious grout, you can't. And the reason for that is because the stone is very porous. I know we seal the top of the stone, but the edges are not sealed. So what can happen is if you use a very dark grout with a very light marble tile, or vice versa, you can get staining of the tile edges, and that creates like a picture frame effect on the edges of the tile. A lot of times you'll see that when after you grout, because the edges of the tile absorb some water and the edges get darker, and then as it dries, the marble lightens up again. If you use a dark grout that has dyes in it and you get that effect, it's going to be permanent. So when you're grouting your floor tile or your marble, make sure you use a grout that is appropriate for that tile. Now this tile was a rectified tile, and we used a 1/16 of an inch grout line. So the grout that I'm using here is unsanded. Generally, small grout lines, 1/8 of an inch or less, you use unsanded grout. Also, grout lines 1/8 of an inch or larger, you use sanded grout. So the 1/8 inch grout line, you can use either or. I will generally use a sanded grout for any grout size 1/8 of an inch or larger. And the reason for that is I just think it fills the grout line better. The only time that I won't use a sanded grout for 1/8 of an inch grout line is when you have a delicate tile that can be scratched. So just keep that in mind. Grout lines, very small grout lines, you use unsanded grout. Larger grout lines, you use sanded grout. Today, most of the time, I will use an advanced grout. It will be the power grout, or it will be put some additive in a grout so that it becomes very stain resistant. When you mix your grout, make sure that you follow the directions. Mix it, let it slake, then remix it. Spread the area that you need to spread. In this case, I spread half the floor, checked to see if the grout was drying, and then washed that, and then went and did the other half of the floor. Depending on the type of tile you have and the type of grout you're using, the grout will either dry faster or slower. So just keep an eye on it and see how it goes. to make sure that you don't get grout drying hard on your tile and make it very difficult to wash off. But on the other hand, you don't want it to be soft, that when you're washing it off, you're digging out the grout out of the grout joint. So just, there's a lot of different types of grout, so there's a lot of different scenarios. So the main thing to do to make sure that you're doing it right is to read the directions and follow the directions. Also on marble tile, see how I got the bucket of water placed on my marble tile there? On marble, do not drag the bucket over the marble. If there's any sand in the bottom of the bucket, it's going to scratch it. Lift and place. And that's pretty much it for this floor.